This podcast does not provide medical advice. Please listen to the complete disclosure at the end of the recording.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Everyone Dies, the podcast. I'm Marianne Matzo.
I'm Charlie Navarrete.
Hi, Charlie. Please relax. Please relax and get yourself something good to eat and drink. And thank you for spending the next hour with Charlie and me. In the first half, we have a recipe of the week, and Charlie has a poem for us.
Says you.
And, well, I'm hoping. A limerick. There once was a girl from Nantucket. In the second half, I'm going to talk a little bit about idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. In our third half, we have a great story of resilience and living with chronic illness from Stevan, and how he came about having his diagnosis of IPF, or idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. So, Charlie, what's our recipe?
Well, among the Pennsylvania Dutch, Amish, and Mennonites, a raisin pie was usually served after a funeral, often having been brought by mourners as a gift to the family of the deceased, a tradition imported from Germany. It's been said that this pie is deliberately made painfully sweet. It has 2 cups of raisins and a cup of sugar to allow mourners to forget.
Whoa.
Yeah, talk about a sugar rush. Might as well just, find a vein and insert it that way. To allow mourners to forget, if only for a moment, the pain of their grief. It is believed that this pie was often chosen because the staples for it were almost always in the pantry, and the pie keeps well.
That's interesting, isn't it? I don't know that I could really all that much get into raisin pie, but maybe.
And so true about like painfully sweet. Yeah, it's not. Yeah. All it needs is a Coca-Cola chaser.
God. So you got all upper society on this week and decided that you were going to do a poem for us.
Oh no, I'm going to do the play. Act 1 of 4 acts. Scene 1. Okay, I'll hold off on that one. Yes, a poem.
Thanks. Thank you. So the poem is called Casa Bianca. Is that, I say that correct?
Yes,
Casa Bianca by
Bianca.
Felicity Hammonds.
Not even close. By Felicia Hammonds.
Oh.
It almost said like
Hammonds. I say Hammonds,
Oh, I thought you said Hamas. So I thought, yeah, there's really
No.
like, why would you even go there? Okay. So.
Yeah, really. We don't got enough trouble.
Yeah, exactly. Right here in River City.
Mm-hmm.
So Casa Bianca. The boy stood on the burning deck, whence all but he had fled. The flame that lit the battle's wreck shone round him o'er his head. Yet beautiful and bright he stood, as born to rule the storm, a creature of heroic blood, a proud though childlike form. The flames rolled on, he could not go without his father's word. That father, faint to death below, his voice no longer heard. He called aloud, "Say, father, say, if yet my task is done." He knew not that the chieftain lay unconscious of his son. "Speak, father," once again he cried, "if I may yet be gone." But the booming shouts replied, and the fast flames rolled on. Upon his brow he felt their breath, and in his waving hair. He looked from that lone post of death in yet brave despair, and shouted but once more aloud, "My father, must I stay?" While o'er him fast through sail and shroud the wreathing fires made way. They wrapped the ship in splendor wild, they caught the flag on high, and streamed above the gallant child like banners in the sky. There came a burst of thunder sound. The boy, oh, where was he? Ask of the winds that far around with fragments strewed the sea. With mask and helm and pennon fair, that well had borne their part. But the noblest thing which perished there was that young, faithful heart.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I'm listening to you read that, and I'm thinking, my kids would have been out of there like a shot if I had told them they could go or not.
Yeah. And it's crazy. I mean this poem's like hang on a second, 1820. Yeah, this poem was written in 1826. It's almost 200 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's based on an actual event. I mean, this actually happened.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And at the time, Casabianca, was also known as the boy on the burning deck.
Really?
Oh yeah. No, this is real. And basically it's just about a commitment. I mean, not leaving your post. And while there have been a lot of stories about people not leaving their post from dating back to ancient Rome and Greece. I remember a Star Trek film where Scotty's young nephew, out on his first voyage, stayed at his post and died at his post, while other cadets, there was this huge attack from some Romulan ship or something, but they all just were scared shitless and started to run wild. But the kid stayed at his post and died. So in Hemans' poem, she writes about a 12-year-old child, and and some accounts had him as young as 10. But she referred to him as a 12-year-old. And while his loyalty to his father and duty is touching, and what you mentioned, your daughters and my son would be like, yeah, okay, I'm out of here, see ya. It is touching and in its way inspirational, but it is of its time. Yeah, but I'm sorry, there's no honor in a needless death. And
well, that's, I think, perhaps maybe one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is our obligation to our word. So if our word is, I will stay at my post, I will do what the captain says, whatever, and you make that agreement, then isn't there honor in honoring your agreement,
absolutely,
even if you die as a result?
But is there a limit, or is there like no? Is there a limit to that, or it just should be honored completely without reserve? Well, okay, maybe reserve, but you just would not leave your post.
Well, I think what I find interesting in this discussion is that you say that we could say, well, 200 years ago, that's the way it was. But we don't believe that now. And so then this part of me wants to say, well, why don't we believe that now? And then, of course,
I was wrong to say that.
Reading an article.
I'm sorry, what?
I was just reading this article about COVID and other countries and the Delta variant, and that there's this concern that, here in the South and in Appalachian regions, there's a very small percentage of people who've been vaccinated.
Right.
And that as a result of this Delta variant coming in, is that it's going to take a very heavy toll on those communities in terms of death, and those communities in terms of resources, and that if you're vaccinated for, a previous variant, then, the mutation is slowed,
Right.
So by not being vaccinated, it's sort of giving a host to these other variants. So yes, it's not a ship with sails that's on fire, but it's sort of like, who is our commitment to? Is it the commitment for this boy, this is commitment to the ship and his father, and this is your post and you stay here till I tell you to move? Or is, your commitment to yourself? I'm going to do what I want to do because I want to do it. And so I wrestle with these arguments that I hear from people about, well, it's my body and I should be able to do what I want.
Right.
But
people don't live in a vacuum.
Isn't there a bigger consideration?
Yeah. No,
right.
I agree.
Right.
People don't live in a vacuum. Yeah. And you know what? I shouldn't have made a blanket statement about, in modern time, people don't do that. No, that's not true. People do it all the time. I mean,
Yeah.
Over the past year and a half, how many, nurses, helpers in hospitals, doctors, walked in every day and literally put their lives on the line.
And they knew that they were doing it. They wore, garbage bags because there was no PPE.
Right.
They were bone tired and exhausted. They got sick themselves. And a lot of healthcare practitioners did make the ultimate sacrifice in that they died from getting that virus.
Right. Yeah.
And even, I was even reading about nurses who had retired who said, my profession and my community needs me.
Right.
And I'm going back to work. And then died from the virus.
Right. Yeah.
And you wonder, how do you make that decision? For me, because I've already had adult respiratory distress syndrome.
Right.
I knew that if I got the virus, that I kind of cheated death once. I don't know if I was going to get a second chance on that one.
Yeah, it's right. Yeah.
I didn't feel like I was in a position to go back and potentially do this. But there were nurses who, were healthy and said, I'm retired, but, the nurses need me. They're short-staffed.
Right.
I need to go. So it's an interesting discussion, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And again, people can do what they want, but then, like I said, we don't live in a vacuum. And especially with modern transportation, things are, in pretty good shape in New York. Where it's like, I don't know, like 70% of people have at least gotten one vaccination. And out of that 70, what is it? I don't quote me on this, but I think it's close to 60% has had, both shots, both doses.
That's pretty impressive, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I could be wrong with that figure. It could be lower, but it's not, I don't think it's significantly lower. But the big thing is, so now we're getting more, we're getting more visitors, from different parts of the country.
Well, Broadway's
are coming in.
Is opening.
Well, it won't open.
Right?
It won't open big until September. But Springsteen, his show reopened.
I was going to say Bruce is there.
Yeah. Right now, he's the only one. They're talking late July, early August. There might be 2 or 3, regular full-blown productions open, but the bulk of it will not open until September. So right now it's just Springsteen. And even then, people, you had to show that you received your vaccines, and people were outside protesting, like, this is unfair. I want to see the boss. It's like, well, there are limits.
Get vaccinated then.
Yeah, you want to see him? Get vaccinated. So
I was at Walmart yesterday getting groceries, and there was quite an elder man who was the cashier, and he had his mask on, below his nose, which makes me insane. But other workers there did not have any masks on at all. So I said to him, I said, so what's the Walmart policy about masks? If you're vaccinated, do you have to wear a mask? He says, if you're vaccinated, show vaccination proof, you don't have to wear a mask. He says, now I'm vaccinated. He said, but, I wear a mask because it makes me feel better, because he's a cashier working with people. And he says, like sometimes I don't wear it. And then I couldn't help myself. I said, or you don't wear it correctly. And he starts laughing. He says, you're right. I don't wear it correctly.
Yeah, that's touching. Yeah, I mean, here in the subway, public transportation is the last, vestige of, a city ordinance. You need to wear your mask in public transportation or, Uber, taxis.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but that's it. If there are big arenas like Madison Square Garden, Foo Fighters were the first big thing in the city. They sold out, and I don't know how many tens of thousands of seats are in there. But yeah, at the door, you had to show that card or else you could not get in. And then once in, if you don't want to wear a mask, vaya con Dios. If you want to wear a mask, don't criticize someone. And it worked out fine.
But everybody who was there was vaccinated, is what you're saying.
Yeah. You could not get in.
Okay.
They don't care if you bought a ticket without that vaccination card. Yep. You had to show your vaccination card. Yeah. Yep.
Now, not to be suspicious or anything, but did they have to have their driver's license or something to show that it was their vaccination card? Or, you know what I'm saying?
If I remember correctly, because everything is, the tickets are different ticket companies. As far as I know, on the ticket is the name of the person, is a person's name. So, and again, I'm speculating here, but every ticket I've seen nowadays for Broadway, for anything, your name is on that ticket. So I'm assuming your name is on the ticket. It needs to match the name on the vaccination card. I'm sure people found a way around it, but for the most part, I believe that's what happened. I'm thinking
of like 10 ways around it already.
That's why you have a PhD.
For $19.95, you can send me a self-addressed stamped envelope, and I will send you 10 ways to get around that.
And you know what? If 1995 is not an easy way to remember, what year is this? Oh, yeah, 2021. So for $20.21, please sell. And please make sure it's a self-addressed stamped envelope. We will. Yes, exactly. So for that and other tips, please go to our website for a link not only to this recipe, but also additional resources for this program. We hope you will follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and remember to rate and review this podcast. Listen, as a nonprofit organization, we are also thrilled to accept your donations. No, seriously, we are very happy to accept your donations. Please go to our webpage to donate and support our work, www.everyonedies.org. That's dies.org.
So thanks for that, Charlie. So in our second half, I'm just going to talk a little bit about IPF, or idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. Now, we've done an entire podcast on this topic. In the program notes for this program, we'll give you the link so you can go back and listen to all the details about IPF if you want to kind of prepare and give you a sense of the interview that we're going to be talking with Stevan today. But let me just briefly tell you. So the disease is called idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. So idiopathic means that the cause is unknown. Now, you might say, oh, well, it's got to be because of people smoking. No, people who've never smoked in their life can still get IPF. They're looking in to see if maybe there's a genetic link to that, but that has not yet been shown. So it's idiopathic because the cause is unknown. Pulmonary means lung, your ability to breathe. Mm-hmm. And fibrosis is scar tissue. which causes the lungs to become stiff and makes it hard to get oxygen into the blood. So when you listen to the other podcasts, there's these little like bubbles in our lungs called alveoli that collect the oxygen as we breathe in and help it, transport it over to the blood. So if those alveoli are stiff and scarred, they're not going to be able to do the job that, they're getting paid to do. And so the person's going to have a hard time breathing. So according to one study, idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis affects about 200,000 people in the United States. You might say to yourself, 200,000, that's not really that many people. Well, it is if it's you.
If you're among that 3,000. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. That was my first thought, too.
And, you've been living your life, you're a relatively young person, and all of a sudden you start having these symptoms where you can't breathe. So the symptoms of IPF or idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis are increase in shortness of breath. You walk out to your mailbox to get your mail and you're like huffing and puffing. You're saying, geez, what's wrong? Why can't I breathe? And it only gets really worse from there. It has a really poor prognosis. The average life expectancy of people who have idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis is about 3 to 5 years after diagnosis. The average, and that can depend on your age. It can depend on if you are a smoker and you're still smoking. It can depend on, if you're carrying a lot of extra weight. It can depend on just a lot of variables. There are a few medicines, 2 medicines that can be prescribed to help with the symptoms, and they may work for you or they may not work for you. It depends. The only really kind of good, and I put good in air quotes, way to manage the difficulty breathing is a lung transplant. And that has a lot of issues associated with it. First and foremost is getting lungs, and being approved to get the transplant when and if the lungs become available. And then my experience in taking care of transplant patients is that there's this mindset that, I'm going to get this transplant and I'm going to be cured. Well, that just isn't true. You can get the transplant and your symptoms are so much better because in this case, like with IPF, your lungs, those new lungs are working good. But anytime you get a transplant, your body is always saying, I don't care what it is, I don't want it here. And so there's this possibility of rejection, is what it's called. And nobody likes to be rejected, including the new pair of lungs that you just got. And so there's a lot of medicines that you have to take in order to prevent rejections. And a lot of follow-up going back with your, to the transplant center. It is involved. And having met Stevan, who we're going to be interviewing, I met him on Facebook. And here's what I was on an IPF support group on Facebook, and there was a message from him to people saying, it's been 5 years since my transplant, and if anybody has any questions, you can contact me. And if anybody needs somebody to go with them for the transplant, I'm available to do that.
Wow!
So let me tell you how important that is, because when I worked at the VA oncology, we had patients who did not have anybody available to them to go with them as the transplant caregiver. And every transplant, no matter what kind of transplant you're getting, you have to have a caregiver to go with you. And it might be for a month in another city. It might be for 2 months in another city, because transplant centers are extremely expensive. They're not in every city in the country. And every transplant center sort of has their specialty. So you might have to go thousands of miles away to get the transplant that is that you want, or you need rather. So it's a big deal to, because if you've got people who are working or you don't have family, or where are you going to find somebody who's going to go off with you to Dallas or wherever it is, whatever transplant center for a couple of months and be there? And here's this man who's saying, I've been through this, and if that's what's standing in the way of you having a transplant, then I'm available to do that. So I saw that and I thought, man, this guy is something else. So I contacted him and I said, would you be willing to do an interview and talk about, this diagnosis? And he was great. And so we're gonna share that interview with you today in terms of how he got his diagnosis. But coming up in later weeks, what we'll do is do further interviews with, how do you get approved? What is that transplant experience like? And it's not the same for everyone. All we're going to do is give you Steven's experience with what he went through. Does that mean, is it going to be what you go through? No. It might be better. It might be worse. I don't know until you do it. But it gives you a one-person sort of shot of, here's his story. And I'm so grateful to Stevan to share his story and to talk with us so that you guys, our listeners, can kind of get insight into that too. So, Charlie, for our third half, would you mind introducing Stevan to our listeners?
Not at all. This week, we welcome Stevan Lemke, who was diagnosed with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis and had a double lung transplant 6 years ago. Stevan is 63 and spends a lot of his time helping other people learn and cope with IPF. He is very open in talking about IPF and shares his philosophy about living with chronic illness. We hope you learned something new from our interview with Stevan.
Today we're going to be talking about idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. And I know that sounds like a lot, like a big mouthful, and you're probably saying, what the heck is that? And I'll tell you, if you haven't been affected by it or you don't know somebody who's been affected by it, it might not be something that you've ever heard of before. So idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, or IPF, is a type of chronic scarring lung disease. It's a progressive disease, meaning that it's kind of just going to get worse. It's irreversible, and it's just a decline in the lung function. Symptoms usually start pretty gradually, can start with shortness of breath, dry coughs, feeling tired. Complications can be pulmonary hypertension, heart failure, pneumonia, pulmonary embolism. So it's all about the lungs. And are these little sacs in our lungs called alveoli. And they kind of, what happens with this disease is they start to stiffen and become fibrotic. And there's not any real known cause. Being a man can make it worse, and you have no control over that. Smoking can make it worse. Environmental things can make it worse. But people can be as young as, in their 40s, be diagnosed with this, never have had a smoking history, be very functional, very active in their lives, and suddenly they'll start with some shortness of breath, some coughing, his cough won't go away, and eventually it, kind of with a lot of going to the doctor, can figure out what's going on. So I thought it would be helpful to talk with somebody who's had this disease. And so our guest today is Stevan. Hello, Stevan.
Hello there.
You guys might be hearing. I'm good. I'm so grateful that you've decided to come and talk with us.
It's my
Our
pleasure.
listeners might hear some growling in the background, and that's Cyrus, Steven's support dog, and he's quite chatty when he decides he wants to be involved. So if we need to have Cyrus give us a story, we'll also ask for something from him. So, Stevan, how old were you? How old were you when you were diagnosed?
I was 62 years old.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about how that diagnosis came about? What was going on?
Well, I was a former smoker, but I had quit smoking for 9 years, and I was feeling pretty good. And I also had worked in the construction industry, and I was around a lot of dangerous fumes and dust and dirt and even asbestos throughout my 30 years of working. And so when it started to get hard to walk upstairs, I just blamed it all on that. And so that was the first time that I noticed was trying to go upstairs was becoming more and more difficult, and it got to the point I could have.
Was that at age 62, Stevan, or was that before that?
That was 60. Yes, I think it was 62. Yes.
Okay.
And so I thought I'd better start exercising because I was getting short of breath, and so I went to my physician, and he gave me an inhaler to use, and just kind of wrote it off as former smoker, just like I was thinking. So I had no reason to think differently. And it began to get worse and worse, where I could only go up a couple stairs, and I was coughing constantly. I mean, just nonstop coughing. Producing phlegm, and so I went to get a second opinion, and the second doctor more or less told me the same thing. He said, "Come on back in 5 or 6 months, and we'll do a CAT scan." And at that time, I talked to my wife about it, and I said, I think there's more to this than they're finding. And she said, yes, absolutely, get a third opinion. So I went to get my third opinion, and but I actually went to a respiratory therapist, is the one who determined what was something seriously wrong with me. Because she was going to help me decide what I could do for exercise and not hurt myself. And during the talk with her, she says to me, how long have your fingernails been clubbed and blue? And I of course, I said I did not realize that. It comes on to a point where, you don't realize what's going on. And she said, your lips are blue too. And she then put an oximeter on my finger and said, I want you to walk down the hallway here with me a little ways. And we went about 30 feet, and my oxygen level was 69. So
good Lord.
She said, you need to sit down right now. I'm going to get you a chair. Stop.
So let me stop you right there. Let me stop you right there, Stevan. So because we have listeners who are saying 69, why is that such a big deal? Well, your pulse oximeter, your pulse, your oxygenation within your blood should be about 99 or 100 because you're breathing, your lungs are taking in that oxygen, and that oxygen goes into your blood, and that's what it should be. And so sometimes, like with exertion, it might go down a little bit because you're puffing so hard, but 69 is pretty dangerous.
And that was only after walking about 50 feet.
That's the sidebar for our listeners. Okay, so was she freaking out?
Well, kind of, but she did it very wisely. In fact, I still know her. I still communicate with her after 5 years, and so now I understand that yes, she was freaking out. But so she got me a chair and sat me down, and she said, "You got something seriously wrong with you. I cannot tell you what it is. But you need to see a specialist now." And that's when I told her I've already seen 2 doctors, and she said, "No, I'm going to get you someone that really knows what they're doing." So she got me to a pulmonologist who he talked to me and listened to my lungs and told me to go get a CAT scan immediately and bring the results back up to his office immediately. So this was quite unlike what any other doctors had told me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I looked at the CAT scan with him, and he said, "See all these holes in your lungs here on the film?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "They're not supposed to be there. You have holes in your lungs." And he said, "I want to put you on oxygen immediately." So I was immediately put on home oxygen and continued my respiratory therapy. But that was when it really sunk in that it was more than just being older and being a former smoker and all that there was something else that was really wrong.
And so what happened next?
Well, I was set up at the home oxygen at, I think it was 5 liters a minute, which is, I guess, higher than some. But within a couple weeks, I was using 10 if I was walking around. I was okay with 5
So it was
5
really
liters.
progressing pretty quickly with you.
It was. But at my original, after I went back to see the good pulmonologist for the second time, this is what he told me. He says, "You have pulmonary fibrosis, and we're going to attribute it to, at this point, with your work history, because it's not caused by smoking." He said, "Your work history of working with all these dangerous fumes, chemicals, dirt and dust and asbestos all the time without a mask on is most likely what the contributing factor is."
Mm-hmm.
And he says, "But at this point, you should have as close to normal life as you possibly can on oxygen. And maybe as time goes by, a few years down the line or whatever, you got to bump it up a little bit so you're on 6 or 7 instead of 5. And, of course, all this is sinking into me. It's like, okay, this is it. I mean, this is forever. I'm going to be on oxygen 24/7 for the rest of my life, and it's kind of scary. Mm-hmm. He said, and I need you to know that there is no cure. And he says the only alternative for patients who are extremely bad is a lung transplant. But he said, I don't want you to even think about a lung transplant because the odds are not all that good. He said, you have like a 50-50 chance to live 5 years. And he said, I believe that you can go on for 15 or 20 years just using the oxygen. So we're not even going to think about a transplant. He says, you just keep going on with your respiratory therapy and living your life, and I think you're going to, stabilize right where you're at.
Steven, can I ask you, is that the typical thing that people who are diagnosed with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis hear, is that they've got 20 years ahead of them?
I can't speak for anybody else, but I know people who have had pulmonary fibrosis for many years, and they're still functioning. They're on just on medication, exercise, oxygen. And so this was he told me this in October of 2014. And I continued on with my my respiratory therapy, and every time I went there, it seemed like I had to turn the oxygen up a little bit more, even if I was walking on a treadmill for a mile an hour or two. And then, unbeknownst to me, the woman who, I call her the woman who saves my life, she was the one who diagnosed me with the 69% oxygen level, had been communicating with the pulmonologist, and I did not know any of this, because she noticed me getting worse. And it got to the point where I was using up one of those carry-along tanks of oxygen that you see people with in the stores, and I could go through one of those tanks in about 20 minutes on a treadmill.
Oh my
and they should last for at least 5 or 6 hours. Sometimes, sometimes they'll last someone more than a day. And so then we go to this Thanksgiving time was only 6-7 weeks after I had been diagnosed, and I got some kind of a respiratory infection, just like it was cold and flu season. And even with my oxygen on 10 at that time, which is as high as it went, I really had come to the conclusion that I was dying. I could not breathe. I could not say a full sentence without stopping, gasping for air, coughing, hacking. It's just like, this is coming on so fast. I don't know how, I can't go on like this. And the doctor had given me different kinds of antibiotics, different kinds of steroids, trying to kick this cold out, and it ended up lasting for about 5 or 6 weeks. And it was to the point where I couldn't walk 30, 40 feet, even with oxygen on, without having to sit down and rest. And this all happened in about 2 months. And so here they had been conspiring behind my back that I was a prime candidate for a transplant. And so when I went to see my doctor in probably January, after the cold was gone and everything, and it had started coming back again. It was only gone for about 2 weeks and it started coming back again. And so I went to my regular doctor visit, and my pulmonologist told me, he said, I told you just a few months ago that I would not recommend a lung transplant for you. But he said, you have progressed so rapidly that that's going to be your only alternative. He says, I cannot do anything more for you. There's no medication. There's no nothing else that we can do for you. A transplant is your only choice. And of course, that takes a while to sink in.
Really?
And,
you're so young, and this is what you're facing?
Yes. I mean, it's like, what's strike three,
How did you, can you remember how you felt when you heard that news? Like, what were the things going through your head?
Well, it was like I was sitting in a tunnel, and everything I heard and felt was off in the distance. And I was just like, oh my, what's going on here? Here, my idea was I can live like this for 15 or 20 years. Now you're telling me I can't. I might not even make it months. That's a big difference. And my head was just spinning, and for some reason, something inside of me just said to accept everything that you're told. Not only accept it, but embrace it. Go with it. Whatever they want you to do, do. And so I kind of just snapped out of it and came back and listened to what he was saying. And he said, there's nobody here in this town that can help you. He said, I'm going to give you can either go to the University of Minnesota or you can go to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. I will write you a recommendation for either one you want to go to. So I chose the Mayo Clinic. This was in January. Well, then it takes a while before you even hear back from them to see if you're even accepted. And so it was about February or March before they had the Mayo Clinic had set up a schedule for me to come down and just to do the testing to see if you make the transplant list. And that was 9 days of testing, solid from 7 in the morning till 5 at night for 9 days for the testing.
Wow.
And so I asked him, I said, can I wait 6 weeks? Because I had 2 young children yet then that were still in
How old were your
school.
kids?
My youngest kids at that time were 13 and 15. And they were still were in middle school and had activities and after school things and friends, they had here. We didn't want to leave them home alone. And so I said, if I could just wait 6 weeks, then they'll be out of school. And then we can all go down there for the 9 days. And he looked at me and he said, you don't have 6 weeks. And that's when my heart fell. It's like, I don't have 6 weeks. And he said, this testing is rough. It is not just, going to getting a blood draw and having interviews. He said, there is a lot of people who I recommend that go down for testing that get halfway through it and quit. They say they can't take it anymore. They just physically can't take it anymore. So they choose to die rather than go through with the testing. And so I'm learning all of this. None of this has ever been explained to me before. But, of course, I'm going along with anything. I'm agreeing. I'm going to do the testing, of course. And it just so happened that my older daughter was off of work, and so she was going to come and stay at our house and watch the younger kids while my wife and I went to Rochester to the Mayo Clinic for the 9 days of testing. And
now, tell me, how did your wife take this news?
Well, of course she was shocked because she kept chiding me, you got to go ride bike, you got to go walking, you got to do something, you're just out of shape. And then to find out that I'm not just out of shape, well, of course, was a shock.
Yeah, because we hate being wrong.
Yeah, of course. Yes, I understand that. But in the meantime, I mean, it was like from February until the end of April that it was still wait time, before the testing would start down there. And I had went and got a part-time job delivering pizza. And I wore an oxygen tank on my back while I was working. And I had 2 extra ones with me. I only worked 3-4 hours at a time. And so that I always have oxygen with me. And I had it hooked up in the back of my car. I had taken out the back seat and put in a 75-gallon liquid oxygen tank in the back of my car, so that while I was in the car, I never had to worry about running out of oxygen.
Oh my goodness.
And then I would use the smaller tanks that I could carry on my back when I got out, to go deliver the pizzas. And my doctor found out about this about the 1st of April. I was telling him, hey, you know what happened at work last night? And he starts laughing, and he looks at me and he says, well, you're not kidding. This isn't a joke. I said, well, no. And he said, you're still working? And I said, yes, I work like 4 days a week. And he said, well, you don't anymore. And he took out his stationery and wrote me a letter that says, I am not to work anymore.
Wow.
And that was around the beginning of April. And then I think it was like April 29th or something like that was our first testing appointments at the Mayo Clinic. And yes, it was brutal, but there was always this something inside of me that just said that everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be all right. All you have to do is just go along with the program and just do what they say. Don't fight anything. All these doctors know exactly what they're doing, and your best chance is just to listen to them and go with it. And
now,
that was the attitude that – go ahead.
Did you have was this voice in your head to accept and embrace what you're told? Is that something that you've had your whole life, or did it just kind of come to you with this diagnosis?
It's something I basically had my whole life. I mean, the core was there, yes. I believe one of the things that also helped me through acquiring this attitude stronger and understanding the attitude more was I started meditating about 2 years before my diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that helped with not embracing, but it helped me with strengthening this attitude that I already had to begin with. And
do you know the origin of that attitude? I mean, is it something your parents taught you, or because I'm sure listeners who are going through the kind of disease process that you had are saying to themselves, well, how do I get to the point where I can just accept and embrace and go through this process or deal with the disease?
That is a quest I'm still on. But I believe, I mean, this is what I believe, that this is not the first time in my life that I was in a life-threatening situation. And it's like I've had an attitude ever since birth, as far as I know, that no matter what, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. I almost died when I was 9 months old, and I pulled through that. And I must have been given a gift at that time. I don't know. It isn't like everybody in my family is like that. I mean, I guess my mother is or was, but yeah, it's just I have this feeling that no matter what I do, everything's going to be all right. I have to listen to my inner voice.
Mm-hmm.
I can't listen to social media. I can't listen to other people's opinions. I mean, I do, but I always take them with a grain of salt, of course, because I know that something has been shown to me somewhere along the line that as long as I do what I'm supposed to be doing, everything's going to be all right.
Well, that's an incredible attitude that must be so empowering for you.
It has played a huge part in my life, especially these last 6 or 7 years with being sick, going through all of the pre-transplant I was in the hospital also for 80 days, and to be in there for that long is quite a feat in itself. But I don't know if I just always search out the positiveness, but it's more to it than that. It's more like I know something. I know I'm going to be okay. No matter what happens, I'm going to be all right. And it's unexplainable. Of course, as this whole thing progresses, I had some near-death experiences during my whole transplant process also that just reassured me that what I'm doing is right. It's the right thing to do, that everything's going to be okay. And also, my doctors and nurses and everybody during the whole transition, they were all so, acting like, oh, we know how to do this. Don't worry about this. We'll take care of this. You're going to be fine. And it was a very believable what they were saying to me and the way they were treating me. Everything was believable. It was like, well, this is cool. This is like another little part of life that I've never experienced before. And I'm kind of looking forward to experiencing this now.
Mm-hmm.
And,
so we wanted. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Oh,
I'm sorry.
I broke your train of thought. I'm so sorry.
Oh,
What we had talked about was talking about the transplant itself in a separate show. So we're gonna park that so everybody can come back and hear the transplant story and those 80 days and all that happened.
Right.
But given, like back at that time before you had the transplant or before you knew if you could get the transplant or if there would be lungs or, there's a lot of variables in getting a transplant, did you make any changes in your life, do anything differently, or did you just say everything's going to be okay and keep doing what you were doing?
Well, of course, I changed my occupation. I was working in flooring, and I went to delivering pizza. I came to the realization that just, hopping on a bicycle and trying to make exercise take this away or make it better wasn't working. In fact, it made me work harder. And I remember one day I had the oxygen on my back, and I was riding my bicycle, and I had my dog pulling me on the bicycle. And of course, for the first 5 or 6 blocks, he takes off running and pulls me, and I just sit there. And then after 5 or 6 blocks, he gets worn out, and then I have to start pedaling, and I couldn't make it home, even wearing oxygen. And
what'd you do?
I just had to get off the bike and walk really, really slow and take breaks. It took me a good 20, 30 minutes to walk back the 5 or 6 blocks that I was away from home. And so, yes, it was a big change of not even being able to ride a bicycle, when I was used to doing that for miles and miles, We'd go out as a family on a Saturday or something and just be gone for hours just riding bikes. And now all of a sudden I can't go 6 blocks. And so, yes, there was, and I was always very strong. I always worked in some kind of an industry where I had to use my mind and my muscles, my brawn, and I was always a very strong guy. and I noticed myself just getting weaker and weaker and weaker, and so I had to compensate for that mentally also. I mean, that was a big blow to me. That was something I took pride in, that here I am, I'm 60 years old and I can still outwork a 20-year-old, and then all of a sudden that's not true anymore. Just almost overnight.
How did you cope with that? Because that can be really hard when you're used to one body and self-image, and kind of it gets cut down with a disease like that.
Well, the only way that I could cope with that is to look inside and say, hey, this is a new life. This is a new beginning. Yes, I was strong before, but I'm not strong now. So things are different. Things are going to be different. I have to live differently. I have to think differently. I have to look into things that I could do to occupy my time rather than going out and maybe, building a fence or something like that in the backyard, which I could do before. Now I would have to do something that was that I was capable of doing, and I found a group of friends who highly intelligent, educated people who would go for coffee every day at a coffee shop, and I was like a mouse in the corner because I wasn't able to communicate with these individuals, and I was going to coffee with them every day, and before you know it, I realized that I was a lot smarter than I thought I was, and I was contributing, and I was becoming a part of it and looking forward to those conversations every day with these people that I didn't think I could actually communicate with. Mm-hmm. And what that led me to a Bible study group that I still belong to, and that also turned into at the church where I was going to the Bible study group. They also have a Buddhist group where you can meditate and take lessons from Buddhist monks, and so I found so many different interests that really enticed me, were really interested in me. To just change, because I had no alternative. I could not go back to who I was. I had to become somebody else. And to me, it was like an easy transition. It was like I met these people, and this situation would lead into another situation, like it was a plan that I didn't know anything about, but I had to jump in and be part of the plan, because this was my new life. It really wasn't. It wasn't a difficult change for me. I adjusted very easily, and I have to say that I communicate with other people who are in the same situation I was, who need transplants, or should be going in, at least going to the doctor, that fight everything. They cannot understand that this is a disease that will kill you. They cannot understand, or they don't want to understand, that this is something that will, you have to go with the flow. You have to change. They're unwilling to change. They would rather suffer than change. And I think, to me, one of the biggest things that allowed me to go along with all of this whole program and to flourish in it is that something just inside of me said, "Hey, you need to change. Nothing's the same. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The way you think, the way you talk, the people you hang out with, nothing in your life is the same. You just have to accept it.
Do you
and you have to look at.
Do you see IPS as a gift in any way in terms of getting you to this new place? Or would you rather skip that whole thing and just stayed where you were?
Well, I think I know a secret, but I don't know what it is, if that makes sense. It's like I know that you have to listen to your inner voice, and you have to do what you are capable of or what you are gifted with. I believe everybody has a gift, but you have to follow that gift. And if you do, you have no idea what's going to happen, but you have to treat it like it's a new day, like it's a new thing, like, oh God, this is interesting. I'm gonna go with this. I didn't know that before. My whole life has to be that way. If I get into a situation where I try to control my own destiny, then I start feeling sorry for myself.
I see.
And so I guess maybe I was lucky enough to find out at a young age that what you're looking for is not what is for you. Rather, whatever happens to you, if you go with it, that is what you're supposed to be doing. Like if I set out a goal to say, okay, I'm going to get my strength back and I'm going to be able to breathe, that's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
If I say, okay, I want to become a ballet dancer, well, that's not going to happen. I realized that I have to go.
So do you make goals for yourself?
Not huge goals, not goals like what's going to happen next week or next year. Now my life right now has been consisting of helping people who are less fortunate, and that's all that I'm concerned about. That's all that makes me feel good, and that can be found anywhere. Mm-hmm. Most of the time when I do come across a situation where I find somebody who needs maybe just a friend or someone to talk to or a lift, is just something that happens. It's not something I set out or plan to do. Mm-hmm. I took a job 1 year after transplant. I shouldn't have been working. They told me to take 2 years off. But I took a job as a bus driver for people with special needs. Mm-hmm. And I had never, ever dreamt of anything like this. I mean, this wasn't something I was looking for, and it was certainly not something that I thought was going to last very long. Mm-hmm. And I absolutely fell in love with it.
I can bet that those the kids or the adults that you're driving are in love with you. Is that true?
That is true. That is. Mm-hmm. Yes. I guess I never looked at it that way before. Thank you. Yes, I know I loved them, and I know that a lot of them loved me too. Yes, we had a great relationship. And it was just something that just happened because I just stopped in this place one day because they had they were looking for people and I needed something to do. It was not a goal. It wasn't something I looked to do or sought out. It was just there for me, and I took it. And that's pretty much how I operate. I go to pulmonary respiratory places, where people that are awaiting transplants or are trying to strengthen up, and I go and talk to them, and I go to hospitals, and I go to the pulmonary sections and ask if there's anybody that needs to talk for a while or anything, and most of the time when I do that, I plan on going in there saying hi, and end up being in there for 2, 3, 4 hours.
Oh,
It's just that's what I like to do. I feel that's what I'm supposed to do. So I guess that's as far as the planning goes, as I will, go to a place like that, a respiratory therapist facility or a hospital. And I just seek out people who might need a companion for a while.
And so you open yourself up to the universe and take in what's offered, is what I hear you saying.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, I guess. I mean, I actually take a little pride in, when I go to the clinic, like coming up here, I'm going to be going for 5 days for my yearly, and I will see somebody across the room in a hospital and go sit down and talk to them and end up being friends with them. I mean, it happens all the time. It's you just have to take it for what it is.
Well, you have such an incredible story, Stevan, and for our listeners, we're going to talk with Stevan again and learn about the whole transplant thing, because that's a whole story and drama in of its own. So for us today, Stevan, I want to thank you so much for just talking with me about this disease and what you went through, and I know it'll help other people who are listening who say, how do I get through this? That you will be a sort of a role model or a beacon in terms of how to get through this. So thank you so much.
Well, it's been my pleasure, and I will talk to you anytime. If I might add just one thing about the transplant, is that I never asked anybody, is this going to hurt? How long is it going to hurt? The transplant itself. But one day, when I was getting put into the hospital prior to transplant, because I couldn't get enough oxygen at home, so they put me in Optiflow in the hospital for 30 days before they found a donor. But when I went into the hospital, one of my doctors had told me, he said, as many of these that I've done, as many of you people like you that I have seen, I still don't know what it's like because I've never actually lived it. He said, you're the only one that's not, but you know what it's actually like. But he said, to be honest with you, somebody told me it was like getting hit by a bus. And that was the only thing that was in my mind. And you know what? It didn't hurt at all.
Really?
So, yes. If anybody is wondering, I don't want to go through this because it's so painful and it hurts. No, I did not. I didn't suffer any pain. They know how to manage your medication so well and take care of you so well that it was really a breeze. It was not painful.
Well, that's good to know, and we're going to really get into that when the next time that we talk. So, Stevan, thank you again.
Thank you.
And with that, please stay tuned for future episodes of Everyone Dies, and thank you for listening. This is Charlie Navarrete reminding you that the idea is to die young as late as possible.
And I'm Marian Matzo, and we look forward to talking with you soon. Remember, every day is a gift.
This podcast does not provide medical advice. All discussion on this podcast, such as treatments, dosages, outcomes, charts, patient profiles, advice, messages, and any other discussion are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Always seek the advice of your primary care practitioner or other qualified health providers with any questions that you may have regarding your health. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard from this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Everyone Dies does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, practitioners, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned in this podcast. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast by persons appearing on this podcast at the invitation of Everyone Dies or by other members is solely at your own risk.